Wrongful deportation of African immigrants or people of African descent in Canada is a violation of United Nations International Convention 1951 Refugee Protection. And we are here today to address the nation, the country, to call upon the government of Canada and all immigration agencies, for example, Immigration Refugee Citizenship Canada, the Ministry of Citizenship, and we are also here to inform, to call upon Canada Border Service Agency, Canada Refugee Protection Division, and the Refugee Appeal Division, that it is a violation of the rights of refugees to wrongfully return or deport them back home. This is a violation of United Nations International Convention 1951 protecting the rights of refugees. My name is Yasin Shiraga Misag from Vancouver, the Executive Director for African Descent Society, British Columbia, and the CEO of Frontline Public Relations. We wanted to bring this information to everybody. Government should stop it, and we needed to stand up to stop the wrongful deportation of Africans back home against their will. As we all know that refugee, their process and the procedures, the Canadian law provides a very good process and procedures where refugee claimants, including appeal, the refugee reviews, refugee report, and the courts of Canada, the federal court, all of them are responsible for the protection of refugees when they arrived in the country. But the question that African immigrants became the subject of deportation, illegal wrongful deportation back home against their will, it has become now a national outcry. Refugees complaining, African organizations complaining, the Black Canadian organization complaining that there are so many various cases targeting the illegal or wrongful deportation of these Africans based on the following reasons. Most of the reasons, if you can go through all of them, you will find that they are totally wrong. And we want our government to make sure that they can take a very, very serious action to make sure that our refugees, claimants in Canada should not be deported. For example, there are some factors contributing about to this wrongful deportation or illegal deportation. One of the reasons you will find out is the inadequate legal support. Inadequate legal support. Inadequate legal support, how does it come in? When refugees arrived here, they are expected to get strong lawyers to represent them. They have the rights to have legal representation. Of course, it's a human right for every person to have the right to be legally represented in any Canadian court. However, when refugees arrived, from my experience in Canada, we always get shocked to see that the legal aid they gave them, legal aid, they go to legal aid and register themselves there. When they reach the legal aid support available for many asylum seekers, they always inconsistency with the cases or the information available for these refugees to help them to represent them in the courts of law. So legal aid, there is a very, very serious weaknesses for among many lawyers given to these refugees. Some of them, they have limited knowledge about the international law in protection of refugees. Some, they don't have even any limited knowledge, experiences from where these refugees, what you call the first or second country where these refugees are coming from. So their knowledge of judgment and support is only limited for about 10 to 16 hours. And that 10 to 16 hours will be based on lawyer's experience, but not what the lawyer should use as a professional legal trained person to support these refugees. A lot of refugees, unfortunately, they have been left hanging their cases with no support. And when they go to the hearing, some of them, they could not be able to present their cases coherently, while the lawyer is just standing there, or even sometimes the lawyers, they don't go to attend to help them to advocate for their cases. In this case, the hearing committee members, they found they are very easy for them to find a refugee claimant inadmissible to their country or to this country called Canada. And what does that mean? Inadmissibility means that the refugee has failed the interview. But who is the main causer? The main causer is the government of Canada. Why is the government of Canada? Because they have provided a refugee with wrongful lawyers who incompetent and who doesn't have enough information to support these refugees in the courts of law or in the hearing committee. Sometimes refugees, they have limited access to English language, especially during this stage. Sometimes you find that refugees, they don't have interpreters, strong interpreters who understand coherently their languages. And another issue which I can really relate to this is failure for the lawyers to advise, to provide professional legal advice to these refugees that you need to get evidences. And of course, a refugee is a person who have left his country due to the fear for persecution and is unwilling to return back home. Most cases, a refugee just flee the country. He does not really know what is behind and where he's going. So in that situation, of course, it can be understandable to everybody that a refugee cannot prepare his evidence or her evidences enough where he's going, because he or she doesn't know what are these evidences required for me to go and seek for asylum. Many of them, they just fled the country randomly. How will you ask the Palestinian refugees who have just been maybe or Congolese refugees or northern Uganda or in Uganda refugees or Kenyan that where are the evidences you brought to Canada? In what circumstances? How does most of these refugees gonna pass the border with such kind of information? At last, refugee, they lost their cases. And this is completely illegal. A refugee, according to the United Nations International Convention in 1951, Protection of Refugees, it is very clear stating that immigration in the third country or the host country must 95% approve and agree with all the evidences a refugee present. That means that they may be verbal evidences. They may not be written evidences. So the issue of inadequate legal support has contributed or have contributed highly to this highest number of deportation of African immigrants back to their country, where we don't know what happens to them, where they face torture and of course die into detentions. And of course administrative errors, or what you call misjudgment, perceptions, misjudgment, perception or stereotype. How does this comes in? You find that some cases, the Canada Border Services, when they welcome these refugees, they started asking them or undermining or misjudgment of the evidences they have provided to them. You find a Canada Border Service officer, SBSA officer, is trying to challenge the evidences, verbally and written evidences. Even the evidences you can see online, the immigration officer will challenge them. This is illegal under the laws, global protection of refugee laws under the United Nations, of which our government, Canadian government, is a very highly esteemed, respectable member of the United Nations. Therefore, what we are asking for, the Minister of Citizenship and Migration in Canada, that let us respect the international commitment of protection, welcoming, protection of refugees when they arrived in the host country by following and respecting, put in respect the international laws and the international human rights declaration for human rights, which protects the rights of these immigrants when they come to our country. Otherwise, immigration officer, Canada Border Services have limited knowledge to assess and evaluate the evidences and all the information of the claimants of a refugee claimant he presented to them. This has to be determined by what? Refugee Determination Unit. Canada has what you call a Refugee Determination Unit. The Refugee Determination Unit, it should be under Refugee Protection Division. When the refugee claimant arrived in the country, maybe has welcomed by Canada Border Service, maybe he arrived at the airport, or has any organization where has been welcomed, or where those refugees been welcomed, they have to go into the process to be supported from the welcoming center, which we don't, of course, we don't have a welcoming center, unfortunately, that Canada doesn't have welcoming centers for refugees. Apart from very little of them, like ISS of BC, they cannot accommodate these refugees. So many of these refugees, they go to organizations here in Vancouver and hide themselves right there. What should have been in this process that from those centers, welcoming center or detention center from Canada Border Service, refugees should, or often they sent them to the legal aid. Legal aid doesn't have any support apart from registering them and assigning them to these incompetent lawyers. Lawyers are incompetent. They have very low experience internationally to support these refugees. And the fact that these refugee immigrants, always they provide them 16 hours from the lawyer. The lawyer will say, I only have 10 to 15 or 16 hours. How about the refugee has already failed or declined the refugee claimant? Then they left hanging them. It's like a government provide legal aid lawyers for the purpose of targeting these refugees to be deported back home. So please, the Minister of Citizenship and Migration in Canada, this is the information is for you. Let us make Canada to look what it is by providing strong lawyers, by cancel all of those forms of hanging deportation orders, by cancel all of those illegal wrongful assessment of refugees, cancel them and approve these refugees because they are protected refugees according to the International Convention for the Rights of Refugees, 1951. They arrived here, they applied for the refugee claimant, and it is our obligation to give them strong advocates, human rights consultants, human rights professional lawyers who can understand the experience of assessment of refugee cases, and we grant them. But it is wrong, and we condemn it, that you can deport Ugandan refugees back home against their will. You can deport Kenyan, you deport Nigerians. This is wrongful deportation. This is the reason Yasin, as expert in human rights, I have worked with the United Nations High Commission for